American thought leaders.
Thank you. It's a great joy to be here.
It's a difficult day. This is the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And, I've been dwelling in this, as have so many Americans and even people outside of the country. And I've been asked to talk about it on various programs. And I keep thinking about the fact that actually everything you're talking about in this book that we planned to do an interview on for months now is kind of central to what's happened. What do you think?
Well, we're speaking with each other the day after this horrible murder, this assassination. I knew Charlie, didn't know him well, we weren't close friends, but we had lunch once together a couple of years ago, had a very, very good conversation. And then Cornel West and I were guests on his podcast just a few months ago, and he treated us both with enormous respect and gratitude and dignity and kindness. So it hit me personally. But of course, there's a larger significance to it. We don't know all the facts yet, but everything is pointing to this being a political murder, a political assassination. And that's chilling. It's far from the first that we've had in this country, but we hate to see this. And the suspicion that all of us had, I think I'm speaking for everybody who's hearing us, the suspicion that all of us had right off the bat is one we hoped would prove not to be true. And that is that this was, in fact, a political assassination reflecting the increasing strain, the increasing polarization of our country. We've now reached a circumstance in which citizens who disagree with each other, in so many cases, don't simply regard each other as civic friends, despite our disagreement, or fellow citizens with whom we happen to disagree. Rather, so many regard themselves as enemies of those with whom they disagree. And enemies are not to be reasoned with. Enemies are not to be argued with. Enemies are to be destroyed.
Your book is called Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth. I think that's something Charlie actually was trying his best to do in both cases, actually on both counts. Right.
Well, what I call for in the book and what Cornel West and I in our work together, our teaching, our lecturing, our writing together have tried to do, is to persuade people that the way forward is not with animosity and acrimony, and certainly not with hatred and violence, but rather with civil discourse. Because if this generation rising today does not adopt a spirit of civic friendship, if they don't value civil discourse, then I promise you something. This grand experiment in Republican government and ordered liberty, bequeathed to us by our great founding fathers, will be lost.
Something I've been saying on a number of these shows that I've been on today, talking about this whole horrible situation, is this term, it just came to my mind. It was the words are violence. This idea that words are violence. And I find it, I mean, maybe it's in the spirit of what happened here. I realize this is one of the most pernicious, terrible concepts because, I mean, and this is, I'd love it if you could kind of, dig into this and show me where I'm wrong or whatnot. But it seems to me like human beings figured out, somehow as human beings, we have the ability to communicate and solve our problems without, let's say, clubbing each other or hurting or resorting to close methods. Without that communication, if we actually stop that communication, if that polarization that you're talking about actually happens, then we lose all of it, right? And so just this concept, I've heard this idea voiced many times, but I didn't fully grasp until now, I think, and please weigh in on this, how terrible a concept it is.
Well, let's explore the arguments on the two sides of that question. I actually come down where you come down, rejecting the idea that speech is violence or words are violence. And like you, I worry about that idea because I do think it's a pernicious idea. But let's give it its due. Let's explore the argument for the idea that words are violence. Because if we do that, we're going to find there's a kernel of truth, but more falsehood than truth. All right. So, words can incite violence. There's no question about that. You know, if we've got a starving crowd in front of the home of a farmer who they believe to be hoarding corn when they and their children are starving, and I get up in front of the crowd and say, he is starving us. He's the one who is responsible for our plight. Let's kill him and take his corn. That is inciting violence. So words can incite violence. And less directly, calling somebody Hitler, or calling somebody a monster, or accusing somebody falsely of horrible things like racism and all the various phobias can lead people to think that a monster like that should be taken out. A monster like that should be destroyed. A monster like that should be killed. You probably heard this line that transgender activists sometimes say. It's a horrid line. They say, punch a turf. Turf meaning a feminist who rejects transgender ideology. That's calling for violence. So there's the kernel of truth, but it's mostly falsehood for this reason. Words are words. They are not violence. Speech is speech. Speech is not violence. And violence is not speech. And violence can never be defended as a form of expression. If we fall into the error of believing that speech is violence or speech can be violence, then we are inviting a justification for violence on the other side as a response to the so-called violence that is really just somebody exercising his or her right to freedom of speech. I can't help being a professor. I always want to give you the argument on the two sides.
But this is exactly what I was looking for. And indeed, I mean, I think there's a compelling argument to be made that the demonization of, say, you know, the president and many others, Charlie Kirk certainly, and many others, as, you know, these very extreme things that you mentioned, right? For example, Hitler, Nazi, whatever. That you know, some crazy person who imagines they're going to do good, and actually in this situation, I mean, what would you do if you knew that this person was going to be Hitler? Maybe you would feel justified in throwing out your moral boundaries, right?
Well, look at what we're seeing right now. There are people. In one case that I noticed, it was a person who claimed to be a Christian who was celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk on the ground that a Nazi had been taken out, a Nazi had been given his just deserts. This is outrageous. And of course, the consequences of that, if it would become a widespread view for our democracy, for our republic, would be absolutely horrific. And my real worry is this: violence begets violence. Political violence doesn't solve anything. I hate to quote Stephen Colbert because I am not a Stephen Colbert fan, but he was right when he said, in response to the murder of Charlie Kirk, political violence doesn't solve anything. It only leads to more violence. Violence on the one side provokes violence in return on the other side, and we could easily fall into a cycle of revenge. And then what becomes of us? It's got to stop now. People on both sides, the right and the left, have to say, it stops now. We will police the crazies on our side, and we need you on the other side of this political or ideological divide to police the crazies on your side. You need to make it clear to everybody that violence is an unacceptable way to deal with disagreement.
Professor George, we're going to take a quick break right now, and folks, we're going to be right back. Sir Robert George, author of Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth. One thing that strikes me here is, and this is, you know, my interest for years has been understanding communist China, understanding how communist systems seek to influence us, how they view us as almost an existential threat in every instance. And when I say us, I'm talking about America specifically, but the West, free societies in a broader way. Their interest, and I think the greatest weapons they've always had, whether it was the Soviet Union or now communist China, is their information warfare operations, is their ability to push ideas into societies. And I mean, I read in a few places in your book you talking about how it became, for example, um, I don't know, cool, right, to view yourself as a kind of an enlightened communist. There's kind of an equivalency between the Soviet Union. That was something that was actively pushed by the Soviets, right? And it was an insane proposition from the beginning, as Solzhenitsyn, you have an amazing chapter about him in your book, put to rest finally, right? I think, right? But this they're so powerful in this way, and their goal is not to convert everybody into being communist. Their goal is to create that polarization and have the two sides fight each other. And this is to me the biggest challenge, because it's like there's someone always fueling that fire. Even some people here, and I don't think I think it's a small group of people that want to see it all burn.
Our true enemies, whether it was the leadership of the old Soviet Union or whether it's the contemporary leaders of China or North Korea, Venezuela, our true enemies are people who want to sow division among our people. They benefit if we treat each other as enemies rather than civic friends who happen to disagree with each other. The real threat from the West, and especially from America when we're at our best, to every totalitarian regime is that it's central to the American understanding, it's central to the American idea that no mere human power is ultimate. The state is not ultimate. The president is not ultimate. The Supreme Court is not ultimate. There's something over them to which they are answerable and under whom they are accountable. And of course, that is Almighty God. The very founding document, the Declaration of Independence, states the proposition clearly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What do we see there? We see the view being expressed, the proposition that our rights don't come from presidents, kings, parliaments, congresses, Supreme Courts. They don't come from the state. They come from no merely human power. They come from the hand of God himself. And because no merely human power gave us our basic rights, no merely human power, no communist dictator, no fascist Führer, no president, no king can legitimately take those rights away. That's the real threat to every form of totalitarianism. If we ourselves, Solzhenitsyn warned about this, if we ourselves abandon our belief that there is some higher power, that there's a God above the state to whom the state is answerable, then we will be defenseless against these totalitarian regimes. And the grave danger is that we will become one ourselves.
Why do you think that this is such a profound cultural moment? Because it is. We all feel it. I mean, Butler, when Butler happened, when there was the assassination attempt on President Trump, everyone was shocked. It was a big thing. But there's something different and unbelievably profound in what's happening right now. And I find it even hard to verbalize entirely what's going on.
Well, I mean, it's very worrying what's happening right now. Our extreme polarization seems to be now cashing out in violence, political violence. We have the school shootings, some of which seem to be driven by some sort of ideological rage. We have, a few years ago, the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise, happened to be a Republican. There was a politically motivated shooting of a Democratic politician, and I believe her husband, in Minnesota just a few months ago. There was some sort of a plot to kidnap the Democratic governor of Michigan. There were 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. Thank God neither was successful. Now, the shooting the other day of Catholic school children while they're attending mass, and now we have the assassination of a political activist who was all about the business, even when he was shot, of engaging people who disagreed with him in rational discourse, rather than pulling out knives and guns and fighting. So yeah, there's something going on. It's something very big. We're at an inflection point, and it's very worrying, very dangerous. We've got to overcome this extreme polarization. We have to persuade our people that their fellow citizens who disagree with them are not their enemies. We need to restore civic friendship.
So one thing that seemed very positive to me was that people that I've noticed that often use very extreme rhetoric, I'm not going to name names, seem to, a number of them seem to mention what you said, that violence is not never the solution, like that. It's almost like that was a kind of common refrain among many people, even whom one might associate strong extreme rhetoric with. So that it seems like a positive development, but is this something that will last? Is it something performative? I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably mixed, actually, to tell you the truth. I think there's some people for whom now, in view of the horrible atrocity that was committed yesterday, there are some people who think, well, the safe thing for me to say to preserve my standing, to preserve my career, is to say violence never solves anything. But they don't in their hearts believe it. And then there are other people who genuinely do believe it. Some of whom themselves perhaps have, in moments of passion, said some rather extreme things. I mean, Charlie himself, especially when he was younger, sometimes in moments of passion, said some rather hyperbolic things. He'd grown quite a lot from the Charlie Kirk of the 18-year-old Charlie Kirk to the 31-year-old Charlie Kirk. He'd experienced an enormous kind of spiritual awakening and spiritual growth and development. His attitude toward civil discourse had grown much friendlier, and he had made civil discourse an actual cause of his. That didn't start when he was 18 years old. He was much more confrontational when he was younger. So we all grow and we all learn. But I hope that even the people who, for now, are merely engaged in performative statements like, well, violence never solves anything, will reflect and think, is this the kind of world I want for my children, for my grandchildren? Is this the kind of legacy I want our generation to leave to future generations? The answer to that is clearly no. Any sane person knows that the answer to that is clearly no. So we've got to get beyond the merely performative stuff and embrace in our hearts the truth about the importance of civic friendship and civil discourse.
You've taught a great many idealistic young people, and so what would you say directly to them at this moment?
Well, first, let's say what the cause for concern is or worry is. Beyond the dreadful, horrific murder of a young father, leaving a grieving widow with two small children who will be fatherless. I mean, the incalculable evil of that. What's the big worry going forward? Well, Charlie influenced a lot of people, a lot of young people, and especially a lot of young men. That's just a fact. Everybody should be, whether you're left or right or whatever your beliefs are, you got to acknowledge that's a fact. He influenced them. You might not like it, but he influenced them. And among the things he influenced them to believe was that we can win in advocating for our beliefs and our policy, the policies we favor, by making the best arguments, by making rational arguments, by engaging the people who disagree with us and winning them over, convincing them, not wrestling them to the ground, not destroying them, not shooting them, but by arguing with them, by trying to win them over. That was his message. There will be some young people, and I fear that it will be especially some young men, this is the biggest worry, who will say, Charlie tried it. I looked up to him. But you know what we learned on September 10th, 2025? Charlie was wrong about one thing. We can't win with arguments, with reasons, with civil discourse, with trying to persuade people, trying to win them over. The only way you win at the end of the day is with force.
And I've seen the intimations of this nature as well, and I'm also find it deeply concerning. And I don't know if it's just in Greek, because people need a little bit of time to process these things, right?
Oh, well, that's certainly true. Yeah. But I hope that especially young men, but young people generally, or anybody who looked up to Charlie influence will recognize that if Charlie were here, if this happened to some other major influencer and Charlie were here, he would not be drawing the conclusion that let's turn to force, let's fight fire, let's avenge this murder. The reason he wouldn't is that Charlie was a serious believing Christian. He wasn't always a serious believing Christian. When he was younger, he was a more secular, libertarian sort of guy, much more interested in confrontation. But he experienced a great kind of spiritual awakening and spiritual growth to the point where the Charlie now we remember is one who did believe in the power of ideas and the power of arguments and the power of reason and of reasoning with each other. And he would say violence is not the answer here. We're not going to answer evil with evil. We're going to answer evil with good. That's the Christian way. That's the Judeo-Christian way. That's the religious way. And I think that's Charlie's way.
Well, Professor Robert George, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you all for joining Professor Robert George and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanye Kellek.